Welcome to Awesome Movie Year, the podcast where we take a look back at an awesome year for movies, which is every year. My name is Josh Bell, film critic and writer, and I am joined by my co-host.
I'm Jason Harris, filmmaker, comedian, and morning DJ on KAB Radio, where we play smooth jazz that no one else in the world ever plays.
Good old KAB. Yeah, we should have gotten Stevie Wayne as a guest on this episode. So we are here at our season finale of our season on the films of 1980. And as we always do in our season finale, we are giving the audience a choice of what we talk about. We presented three choices to the audience, three horror classics from 1980, including Friday the 13th and Maniac, and the one that you all voted for, which is John Carpenter's The Fog, which was kind of what was expected, I guess. Although Friday the 13th, probably a more well-known film, at least as a franchise, but I think The Fog has more goodwill in terms of quality, I would say.
It's become a cult classic, like 75% of John Carpenter movies. So.
Yes. Fair. Yeah, you're right. It has become a cult classic. A lot of Carpenter movies from the 80s, especially, that maybe didn't do huge box office numbers have become not only cult classics, but I think general horror classics that are acknowledged just in a wider sense as important horror movies. This one, however, actually did do decently well at the box office, grossing $21.3 million on its $1.1 million budget. And it was a follow-up to John Carpenter's massive hit Halloween, which is, I think at the time was like the highest grossing independent film of all time. Just did huge business. So this was when he was kind of riding high on that success, and people were really anticipating what is the next horror movie going to be from John Carpenter. So it did bring in audiences, even though this is a very different movie from Halloween, I think. Jason, I don't know if have you seen Halloween?
You know, Josh, I was going to mention to you, like, John Carpenter is a total, I'm not going to say a blind spot because I obviously am aware of him, but I've not ever explored the films of John Carpenter, Josh.
All right. Well, I mean, I know you're not a big horror fan, but Halloween, at least, is a complete classic. I think it's one of the greatest horror movies ever made, one of my favorite movies, and it certainly was a huge success. But this is a very different kind of film. And I could imagine that maybe even audiences at the time coming into this film, having loved Halloween, maybe were a little put off by the sort of old-fashioned spooky ghost story tone of this movie versus the slasher movie template that they use in Halloween. So maybe audiences were a little thrown by this film, but it was a big success in theaters. It was not a big success with critics, though. Even critics who liked Halloween, and which was interesting to me because a lot of times these smaller horror movies don't get a lot of critical acclaim at first, especially from this era when horror in general was not really well regarded by critics. But a lot of critics did like Halloween. It was interesting to me watching like Siskel and Ebert talk about this film, and they gave it 2 thumbs down and they were not a fan of it. But both of them had really liked Halloween, and they felt like this was a disappointment and sort of a step down from the movie that they had liked. So that seems to have been the general critical consensus on this one. Roger Ebert, in his review, said, "The problem is with The Fog. It must have seemed like an inspired idea to make a horror movie in which clouds of fog would be the menace. But the idea just doesn't work out in The Fog, John Carpenter's first thriller since Halloween. The movie's made with style and energy, but it needs a better villain. And it also needs a slightly more plausible plot. We don't really care about the logic of the plot in horror movies, of course, but there has to be some plausibility, just so we know what the rules are. Carpenter's Fog, which contains the ghosts of murdered sailors, is too unpredictable. A sentient fog may be photogenic, and this is a good-looking movie, but can we identify with it? Is it the kind of villain we love to hate? Not really." And this is a point that multiple critics make that I don't really get the criticism here, that The Fog needs more personality or something.
I was hoping The Fog would do a song and dance number at some point in time.
Right. I mean, part of the scariness of this is that it's sort of this monolith of mute nothingness that's coming after people.
Well, and Josh, we know that dead pirates have never succeeded as movie villains. There hasn't been a huge franchise where pirates have had to fight dead pirates or anything like that. But I will agree with him that it is not a scary bad guy. And I'm not just saying the fog. I mean, those dead pirates are not scary at all.
Yeah, I think the tone here is different from Halloween. It's more like campfire spooky ghost story, the way that it's established at the beginning. And I suppose you're right that the dead pirates maybe are not super scary. I feel like they might be scarier for like a younger audience, even though I'm sure this is rated R. I feel like this is a movie that might be good. Is it not?
It's rated R.
Pirate joke. Of course it is. Of course it is. Thank you. But I mean, I feel like this is a movie that weirdly would be good for like a kid's first horror movie if you're like 11 years old or something like that, because it's just spooky enough to kind of jolt you, but it's not full of blood and guts and, you know, multiple murders or anything like that.
Unless, of course, that kid was our producer, Dave, because his first horror movie was probably like Slumber Party Massacre or something like that at age 4.
Yeah, Dave always being exposed to inappropriate films at a young age. Did you see Halloween when you were 8 or something like that, Dave?
No, but I remember having nightmares for like months after Creepshow, which was around this time.
And Creepshow is actually a good comparison for this, because I feel like it's that old kind of EC Comics ghost story tone where it's, you know, spooky and kind of humorous, but not necessarily like viscerally scary.
And it also features Adrienne Barbeau and Hal Holbrook, like this movie.
Yes, and I think Tom Atkins too maybe was in a Creepshow 2 or something. All of them involved in the Creepshow franchise later. So Vincent Canby in the New York Times had some similar criticisms. He said, having given us a substantial start on a spooky, comfortably old-fashioned ghost story, Mr. Carpenter appears to forget what kind of a movie he wants to make. The Fog is neither a rewarding ghost story, nor is it science fiction, though it borrows freely from both genres, to such an extent that air pollution or H-bomb testing might as easily be blamed for the film's mayhem as the leprous ghosts. Unlike Halloween, which was a model of straightforward terror and carefully controlled suspense, The Fog is constructed of random diversions. There are too many storylines, which necessitate so much cross-cutting that no one sequence can ever build to a decent climax. The movie looks quite pretty, but prettiness of this sort is beside the point in such a film.
Yeah, who said that, Josh?
That's Vincent Canby in the New York Times.
I had to ask again because normally Vincent Canby and I are diametrically opposed. But I kind of agree with everything on that one.
Okay. Even the sci-fi, I never thought that this seemed like a sci-fi movie in any way. Did that strike you as that kind of thing?
No, I guess that's fair. It's like got that supernatural element, but not sci-fi. But really just the idea of like the dilution of the overall products because the lack of character movement, development, knowledge of these characters. That was a big issue for me on this one.
Yeah, I mean, I like that it was an ensemble, that it wasn't like Halloween, which just kind of has a small cast and then whittles them down as they all get killed. I like that this was a sort of a tapestry of what's going on in the town, and the people don't necessarily even all come together. You feel like in this kind of movie, eventually they're all going to team up and discover what's going on, and that kind of never really quite happens. And I like that they're all dealing with it in different ways. I understand what you're saying, that maybe we don't learn quite enough about each of the characters, but I feel like there was enough there that I cared. You know, you've got Stevie Wayne and her background, having come from the big city to buy this little radio station in this small town of Antonio Bay, and her relationship with her kid. And you've got Jamie Lee Curtis as the hitchhiker who is sort of trying to find herself, and she's hooking up with Tom Atkins. I felt like there was enough character there for me to care.
100% disagree. You couldn't tell me one thing about the relationship between Stevie Wayne and her son other than that he's her son and there's no dad in the picture.
I mean, I feel like that's something, and that tells you something about their relationship, that she's struggling to raise him on her own. She has to go work at the radio station. She has to leave him with Mrs. Kobritz. I mean, that's all single mom kind of stuff that.
Yeah. If you want to broad stroke it and, just kind of trope it, sure. But there's no character. There's no interaction, no development. And you mentioned Jamie Lee Curtis, like, man, hey, I'm hitchhiking. Okay, now apparently we slept together. Now apparently I'm just clinging to you. I know nothing about her other than that she wants to go to Vancouver and she makes art. So you're telling me that's information. I'm telling you that's not information. That's the very broadest strokes you could give me.
I mean, she also talks about how she came from this rich background and she's not been able to find herself, and that's what she's doing. I mean, I don't need a really long character drama between these people. I want to see the fog kill people. Like, that's what the movie's about.
Well, and again, like I said, the fog killing people wasn't that, didn't really kick that into overdrive for me. But, if you look at, like, we grew up with Scream, right? I felt like that's an ensemble cast and you knew way more about those characters.
And that's a very different kind of movie. That's this kind of hip, self-aware, meta commentary stuff. And those characters all also are broad strokes in a lot of ways that you learn enough to have some investment in what's going on. I mean, and that's a movie that has a bunch of sequels where you learn more about those characters over time. But just in the first movie, I feel like there's maybe just a little more than this. And this is a very different kind of thing. It's a campfire story. Those kind of stories have no character development, and this has more than that.
Well, I love, ensemble films. As you know, I try to write a good amount of them. I just there was no reason for me to invest in any character, except to say like, oh, Hal Holbrook, I like him. Janet Leigh, what is her character?
I mean, she's very invested in the town, and she's also upset that her husband has died because he was.
Wow. What a character!
What do you want? These are emotions that the characters are having. I'm not sure what else do you want.
She's upset that her husband died. Oh my goodness! So
I think the thing is you have to either accept this movie on its terms, the whole campfire thing, or not, because what she is. She's this lady who's a widow. That's
right.
You research the film and it's like, hey, they weren't happy with the product, so they brought in John Houseman and they did that first scene with the campfire that you guys are talking about.
Right.
But then I'm like, okay, I never see any of these kids again. I never see John Houseman.
You see Stevie Wayne's kid.
That's the one kid you see again. You never see John Houseman again. I'm like, why is this guy talking to all these kids in the middle of the night? Like, what is going on here? I needed something more for that.
Yeah, I just feel like you're looking for a completely different kind of movie than what this is. And that's fair. This is the kind of movie that didn't work for you.
Yeah, well, I mean, like I said, I was like, all right, act 1 and 2, cool, we're moving along. And then I thought like it would ratchet up in act 3 and it ratcheted down for me. But I think that's probably because I didn't care about the characters and the kills were pretty boring to me.
All right. Well, you're like, most of the critics are with you. I did find one more positive review, although it's kind of a lot of backhanded compliments. This is Richard Corliss in Maclean's, who said, "The Fog is a fine, funny, scary ghost story that's sure to disappoint a lot of people who judge movies by how much sense the plot makes and how close the acting is to the old Vic. Following the success of Halloween, Carpenter is sticking to, quote, schlock horror movies, and in doing so, has developed the sleekest, most intelligent visual style to emerge since Martin Scorsese made Mean Streets. What's exciting and sophisticated in Carpenter's movies are not the plots, they're plastic. It's the mastery of ominous tracking shots in Halloween, of the sensuous zoom in his TV movie Someone Is Watching Me, of invisible editing in The Fog, all of which creates the mood that belongs to film and no other art." So on the one hand, he's saying he's as good as Scorsese, but on the other hand, he's saying a lot of not very positive things about the other qualities of these films.
I mean, he's obviously a talented filmmaker, and I don't have to say that. I mean, we all know that to be the case, and I just I had no problem with it from like a technical standpoint. It's a nice looking movie, and The Fog looks cool.
Right? Yeah. I mean, and I think it's a kind of movie too that on not a huge budget, he makes it look bigger than it is. I think part of that too is the ensemble cast, is that it feels like this larger story because we keep checking in with all of these different characters. It doesn't feel like a small scale production. But I think also that he's sort of being a little too dismissive. I don't think the acting in this movie is bad at all. Even if you're disappointed in the character development, I think the actors are giving everything they can to the characters they have.
Totally. I didn't agree that it was funny though. Did you think there was something funny in there?
I don't know. I mean, maybe there's a few like slightly humorous moments, but yeah, I didn't necessarily think it was meant to be funny. But I do think what he points out that this movie is kind of about a mood, that it's more about that and the tone and the style than it is about the detailed character development. I felt like there was enough in the characters that I could care about, but I do think that this is a movie that's more just about enveloping you in that spookiness. And if you don't feel that, then you're not going to like the movie.
What was spooky in it?
I mean, I think that the story that opens it and the details that Hal Holbrook's character, the priest, learns from the secret diary that he finds hidden in the walls in the church, where we learn about the background of the founding of the town. I think the fog itself is spooky. And I think the pirates are spooky. I don't think they're scary per se, but I think the way that he leaves them shrouded in shadows almost all the time gives you the ability to kind of project something on them that is spooky. Something knocking at your door with a hook hand all of a sudden is spooky, but it's the kind of spooky that's from a campfire story.
Yeah, I guess that, but for me, that got undercut when you saw the kills, because they're like so flaccid kill. Yeah. Those kills needed a boner pill.
I mean, I don't think they're definitely not super graphic. They're definitely not like what you would expect from seeing Halloween, but I think they fit with the tone. So I guess we're kind of rehashing that. But so Jason, obviously you had not seen this, and like you said, you've never seen any Carpenter movies, not even like Big Trouble in Little China or Starman or any of the more.
Yeah, I haven't really just blew it with John Carpenter. I mean, and I totally respect him, and I love what an independent spirit he is and all that he's accomplished, not just as a director, but as a creator of stories, and of course as a film composer as well. Like, so I gotta go back and watch it, and I really like the impetus for this film, right? Like the inspiration for it. It just didn't come together for me.
Yeah, no, that's fair. Dave, had you seen this one before?
Yeah, I saw it a few years ago for the first time. I kind of did a little Carpenter marathon around Halloween one year.
Yeah.
Do you know what year it was, or are you foggy on that?
Oh, that's
Fog, because the movie. Right. The movie's called The Fog.
It is.
That's
it sure
good.
is.
So I said, are you foggy?
Yeah.
On that.
So I'm a big John Carpenter fan, although I haven't seen all of his films, but I think all of the major ones. And like I said, Halloween is definitely one of my favorites, and I think is just possibly the greatest horror film ever. And I watched this in 2005 for the first time when the remake was coming out. So, which is
the acclaimed remake that everyone loves.
It's a very bad movie, but I think that was my sort of inspiration for finally watching this. I remember loving it at that time, and I liked it a lot this time, not quite as much, I think. But at that time, having seen, I think, a good amount of Carpenter movies, but maybe not quite as many. And also I had seen a lot of the 90s Carpenter movies in the theater as a teenager that are very bad. And so this was kind of like, oh, right, he made a lot of really good movies in the 80s before he really fell off after that. So, so I like this movie, and Jason, not so much. But
it's okay. It's okay. Right. You're not going to like them all, buddy.
No, that's fine.
Anything if you do like them all, like, what's the point? Like,
right? Why would we even have a podcast just going like, I like every movie?
I love movies.
Yeah, I love movies. Yeah,
so that podcast? Hosted by Josh's mom.
Right. Even my mom sometimes. I know a movie is bad if I take my mom to see it and we come out of it and she's like, that wasn't very good. It's like, whoa, that movie must have really sucked.
Classic.
So, anything else on the background of this film you want?
Yeah, Josh, I had mentioned the kind of inspiration. I was going to ask you, have you seen any of those films, British films, either the Trollenberg Terror, the Crawling Eye, or the Master Gunfighter from 1975? Have you seen any of these, or Terror Creatures from the Grave?
No, I haven't. But I mean, I think I've seen similar kinds of films, and you can see that Carpenter is going for that, again, old-fashioned Hammer film kind of ghost story thing here. But I haven't seen any of those specific films that have similar elements, like with ghost pirates or anything like that.
Yeah, and you mentioned EC Comics, obviously.
Yes.
And of course, the John Greenleaf Whittier poem, The Palatine, which I shall recite for you now.
Oh, boy. That's what people come to this podcast for, is poetry reading.
Oh, yeah.
I did want to note, I mean, a couple of sort of relationshipy things. This was the first and one of the only times that Janet Leigh and Jamie Lee Curtis, who are, of course, mother and daughter, worked together on a film. And this was the first film role for Adrienne Barbeau, who at the time was John Carpenter's wife, and she'd done TV, but not been in any movies.
So, Josh, did you think that was a missed opportunity with Janet Leigh and Jamie Lee Curtis? I would have loved to have had a little more interaction between those two.
I guess, but I could imagine, I mean, and I don't know what the backstory is, but I could imagine them saying like, oh, we don't want to, play this up and be cutesy about it. Like, let's just, we're both actors who are cast in these parts and let's just do our jobs kind of thing. So yeah, they definitely didn't. I mean, they don't play mother and daughter, and there's very little interaction, and there's never any kind of acknowledgement at that time that there's a connection between them. So maybe they could have done more, but it doesn't necessarily bother me.
Cool.
All right. Well, we'll come back then in a moment and talk about our general thoughts on The Fog.
And we're back here on Awesome Movie Year on KAB Radio, the only smooth jazz movie podcast around. Josh, tell us a little about The Fog.
Thank you for that. I feel like Stevie Wayne is not necessarily that. She has a bit more energy. She doesn't feel like a sort of like a quiet storm DJ necessarily. She's eager to share the news and happenings with her audience there in Antonio Bay. So
look out for the fog. It'll come in and murder you here on KAB Radio.
Something like that. Something like that. So we are talking about John Carpenter's The Fog in the season finale of our 1980 season. And it was our audience choice episode. So even though Jason didn't really like it, I assume a number of listeners out there are fans.
Hey, Josh, let me say a few nice things about this
please
film,
do.
okay?
Please
because
do.
I'm not saying it's like it just didn't do it for me. Whatever.
Fine. That happens.
First of all, I love the location, these kind of sea shanty towns. I'm a big fan of that. Like, Blow the Man Down from a few years ago. Love that. Love that stuff. Great use of location. The lighthouse is a very cool location. And, she gets on the roof. I wanted a little more of that because it was shot in so, close up, maybe because of the budget, but I really think they could have done something there. But the whole town, the centennial celebration, and as we said, the fog looks cool, and the music, that's one of his strongest things is film composing and shot composing. So again, from a technical point of view, big fan. Location's great. No problem with the acting, just story-wise and kill-wise, it just didn't do much for me.
Yeah, I love the town of the Antonio Bay, and I feel like they give you a real sense of this small California town that's about to celebrate its centennial, which, of course, as we learn, it was built on murder.
Not just murdering lepers.
Murdering rich lepers. It was a very weirdly specific kind of murder that happened. There was a rich guy who was a leper. Blake, right, wanted to start a leper colony in the area of Antonio Bay, and the local townspeople were not having it. They didn't want lepers in their town or near their town, and so the priest spearheaded this effort to cause a shipwreck so that all the lepers died, and the rich guy's gold was left for the town to use to build itself up and to found itself. And 100 years later, the ghosts of these lepers have returned to take their revenge.
And Josh, in the research I read that around this time, there was a novel that kind of spoke to the fog in the background by Dennis Etchison, very famous novelist, Dennis Etchison.
Sure.
I don't know who he is. But anyway, one thing that was in there is it was made clear that the six must die had to be descendants of the conspirators who murdered Blake and his crew. And I felt like had they kind of said like, the father and Janet Leigh and the Nick character, like had we had that as background and now we know that they're fighting, for that extra level, I think that would have really gone a long way.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with you that might have helped. It does seem sort of arbitrary who they kill. I mean, they start out by killing these three guys on this boat that's out on the water one night, and we never know really if these people are related in any way to the original conspirators. One of them is Janet Leigh's husband. And then they seem to just kind of come into town and kill whoever they can find. They kill the weather guy, and there's no sense of whether he's related. And it's not till the very end of the movie, really, with Hal Holbrook's character, who's the local priest, and he's a descendant of the priest who initially planned this whole massacre and finds the diary and learns about it. And like the literal very, very, very end of the movie is him saying, wait, only 5 were killed. Why not me? And then they're like, oh, right. Yeah, we got to kill you too. And they kill him. And that's the only one that has that real connection.
Yeah. And also the thing with that is like, I know that's like a horror trope. It's like, hey, we saved the day. And the last shot is like hand coming from grave, monster coming out of closet, whatever.
Sure.
But I thought they did a fine job of like establishing, hey, we've fixed this problem. So then for all the pirates to come back exactly the same, like 2 minutes later, the next day, like I just felt like that deflated it even more for me.
Oh, see, I mean, that is a very familiar kind of horror ending where you have that little stinger at the end, like, oh, we've saved the day. Wait, maybe we didn't. But I felt like it wasn't just that. It was the whole buildup for that whole movie. The whole point of Hal Holbrook's character is discovering this horrific thing that his grandfather did and learning about the past of Antonio Bay and realizing what the ghosts are there for and how we have to atone. And he almost wants to get killed. He feels so bad about what's happened.
Right. But he did atone. He gave him the gold back. He talked about how horrible his grandfather was and how the town is built on a lie. So I thought like his character had that arc where it was like, okay, you can let him go. Maybe it's like, you know, I get it. Like they decapitate him at the end, but maybe it would have just been like, you know, if they had done something a little more subtle, it's like, why not me? You know, and we had seen like him look out and you see the ghost ship or something a little more subtle. I felt like that would have been more effective. And you know what, John Carpenter? That's right. I'm telling you how to make. No, I'm just kidding. But for me, it wasn't.
Yeah. I mean, all right. I feel like that is one effective moment. And that whole arc of that character does what you were saying is sort of missing with the other characters, where he has this clear connection. You learn more about him and why he's in such anguish about what's happened. And I do love the ridiculousness of like, the old diary that's like been in the church for 100 years behind a brick that he finds. I mean, it's such a silly ghost story thing. And the way he's reading it, and it's such a movie thing too, where as he's reading it, he reads like 2 words and then turns a page and like each page only has 2 words written on it. Anyway, that's just sort of just a silly movie thing. But I felt like all of that combined for this sort of like old fashioned EC Comics kind of tone to the thing.
Josh, you know, we didn't see much of the father's assistant, Bennett, after his first scene, and that was the cameo by John Carpenter, uncredited.
Oh, yeah. Lots of sort of references here. A lot of the characters in this movie are named after people John Carpenter worked with, like Nick Castle and Tommy Wallace, Dan O'Bannon, including Tommy Wallace worked on this movie even as a production designer, I think, an editor. So, you know, fun little references. It definitely feels like a movie that Carpenter is having fun with and is referencing old school horror and referencing his friends and whatever and kind of having a good time.
Yeah, I just think like, hey, man, it's the centennial. We should call it Founders Day and talk about the 6 founders and revere them. And then we see that like how the family tree comes down and, oh, now we know that the murder is going to be someone related to the founders. And does that pit family members against each other? Do they work together? Do you know what I mean? Like, I think there was a lot of meat left on the bone here.
I mean, we could have done that. I feel like that's a different kind of movie. And, you know, he obviously wants to have characters like Stevie Wayne and Jamie Lee Curtis's character who are outsiders. I mean, Stevie Wayne lives in the town now, but she's obviously come fairly recently to buy the radio station and take it over. She wouldn't be a descendant of any of the founders, and Jamie Lee Curtis is just hitchhiking in. And I like that too. I did like that mix of people like Janet Leigh or Hal Holbrook's character who are clearly like tied to the town and have this sort of pride in it and have lived there for a really, really long time. And then Stevie Wayne and Jamie Lee Curtis who just are coming in, they're passing through, or they show up and they kind of are taken by the charms of it. I mean, even though Jamie Lee Curtis, you know, she shows up and gets a ride from Tom Atkins and immediately like all the windows in his truck shatter mysteriously. And she's like, you know what? I'm going to stay in this town. This seems like a cool place to hang out.
Well, not just that happens. And then they bang. Like that's literally the next scene. Like, oh, you picked me up. Okay, cool. I'm a hitchhiker. Let's bang. Like what? You know, it was a little wacky there, but as far as the town itself, it did make me want to be like, oh, I should drive to Northern California and go check out some of these fun beach towns,
right?
Sea towns.
It definitely had that feel. At one point, they referenced Bodega Bay, which is a real town, but is probably most famous for being the setting of The Birds, and that has kind of a similar feel. And I again, I feel like that's another movie that maybe Carpenter is trying to evoke here, where it's got this natural phenomenon that seems completely harmless that is now deadly and people have to run away from or whatever. I mean, I love the sequence of Stevie Wayne on the radio kind of narrating, now the fog is here, and they have to outrun the fog. I mean, if you think about it for 2 seconds, it's like, how absurd is it that they're trying to outrun fog? But it works. It's like suspenseful and creepy.
Dave, what do you think?
I mean, I think it's great. Mainly, I don't want it to sound like a cop-out, but like taking this movie, like I said, for what it's supposed to be, which is that kind of campfire vibe of just like a silly ghost story that you tell kids, like, Josh said earlier, kind of maybe for kids, like a first horror movie or something like that. It is what the movie is. And all of it from the, like you said, the cinematography to the score to the performances, all of it just adds up to just really capturing that vibe of like just a silly, spooky story that someone's telling you.
Yeah, I think the vibe is really the key thing. And Jason, you're not wrong about some of your criticisms of the plot and the way that it might fit together more effectively. But I think it's really about the vibe. And like I keep saying, if you don't watch that first scene and think I'm all on board, then this isn't going to work for you.
What movie of this kind of campfire ilk would you say, if this one I didn't go for, would be one that I would go for?
I mean, I don't know. I think this is a really good example of that. I mean, the Creepshow movies we keep talking about definitely have a similar kind of vibe, but I don't see you being into those movies really at all. Or I don't know, they're more recently like Scary Stories to Tell in the Dark, which was kind of up and down on that. Or really, honestly, like the Goosebumps movie. I feel like the Goosebumps movie is very influenced by something like this. It's more kid friendly, but it's the same kind of vibe. The sort of silly stories that are come to life kind of thing. So I don't know if you've seen that with your daughter, maybe, but I feel like this is maybe just not a genre for you.
You ever sit around a campfire, Josh?
Maybe.
Tell scary stories.
I'm not a outdoor person. So, I mean, maybe when I was in summer camp, we did that. I don't recall doing a lot of like scary storytelling, but I did love reading Scary Stories to Tell in the Dark, the books as a kid, which are very much like collections of campfire stories and urban legends. And I loved those.
I used to like campfires, but now it just sounds very uncomfortable. I'd need to bring like a beach chair with me.
Yeah. All that dirt and rocks and
logs.
Right. Exactly. It's no good. It's no good, but we
should be eating s'mores during this episode.
Maybe we should. I don't think they actually eat any s'mores in the movie, but yeah, I mean, it's maybe not an experience we're going to have, but it's certainly a mood that this movie evokes.
Josh, one of my criticisms, like I said, were the kills were just so wimpy. Tell me why I'm wrong.
Well, I mean, I think you're wrong in the sense that I wouldn't describe them as wimpy, but I don't think you're wrong in the sense that they're not graphic, they're not intense. I think they're not meant to be. I think that is one of the things that they maybe tweaked a bit in those reshoots, that they made them a little more intense. There's at least one scene where you actually see a close-up on one of the ghost pirates' faces and it's all melty and it's got like worms and stuff. I feel like that wasn't even really necessary. But yeah, I mean, I think in these sort of campfire stories or urban legends, it's all about the buildup. It's the man with the hook hand and he knocked once and he knocked again. And that's what it's all about.
What happened?
Right. And then
Josh, tell us the ending of that story.
Right.
I agree with Josh like completely. It's all about the buildup, because in those stories it's like, and then he got murdered. like that's it. Like you don't actually see it. Like you don't get the whole thing. And yeah.
Right. I mean,
right,
honestly,
but
if you watch the Creepshow movies or you read EC Comics, many of those endings could be accompanied with that sound effect. And that's like on purpose. But I think this movie doesn't go full on cheesiness in terms of like what the Creepshow movies do. But yeah, that sort of the comeuppance with the founding of the town and whatever. And yeah, the build up, the point isn't like, let's like have a graphic depiction of a kill. It's like, what happened? Was he at the door? And sometimes the end of the story is like what we see early in the movie, where Tom Atkins and Jamie Lee Curtis have just slept together and the ghost knocks at their door. And by the time he gets there, the ghost is gone. And so that's the story. He knocked once. Oh my God. He knocked again. Oh my God. And then they open the door and there was nothing there. And that's the story.
Josh, you have a good voice for that. You should do some audio narration on these campfires.
Sure. Yeah. I'll do the audiobook of scary stories to tell in the dark or something like that. But yeah, I mean, I think this is the tone that Carpenter is capturing very well here, that, you know, not to repeat myself, but that obviously, Jason, it wasn't for you.
So as a neophyte to John Carpenter, where do you rank this out of the Carpenter movies you've seen?
I mean, I still rank this pretty high. I think I didn't like it quite as much, like I said, as the first time. I think you talk about Halloween, of course, and The Thing. I mean, those are probably both from the 80s. Those are probably his best films in both horror films. I like Escape from New York a lot. I actually really love his version of Christine, the Stephen King story, which gets kind of mixed response. All of those from this period in the 80s where he was just like constantly on fire. So I might rank it below those few. But I mean, I don't know if that's the top 5 or top 6. But if I was telling someone like, here's a list of John Carpenter movies to check out, I would put this on here because it has a sort of a unique place. It's doing a particular thing that I think it's doing well and that he doesn't really do in any of his other movies.
And Dave, what about you? Where do you put it?
Probably top 5. The Thing would be my number 1. I love They Live. They Live is awesome. I actually am in the minority on Halloween. I don't really like Halloween that much.
Ooh.
Man.
Yeah.
Nerd fight.
Yep. But, I've always thought that Halloween would have been a great title for The Fog because it feels like just that kind of silly spooky rather than actually scary. It
is. And you know what, Jason, what another movie that we've talked about on this podcast that really tries to get this tone is Trick or Treat.
That's what I thought the whole time, but go on.
Yeah. No, I mean, and I know we weren't generally that enthused about that movie, but that it has a big cult following.
I thought that evoked, because I did think about that. I thought that captured it better in some of those segments than this did.
All right. Well, that's fair. So should we give this a rating out of 5 Ghost Pirates?
Sure. It gets 2.5 Ghost Pirates for me, as I've said. Totally capably and expertly crafted, just didn't raise the roof for me. The fog didn't come rolling in on me.
No, the fog stayed back. From you. Yeah. I'm going to give it 3.5. And I think I might have rated it 4 when I first saw it. And maybe it didn't grab me quite as much this time, but I do really enjoy this film. And I do think it's one of Carpenter's best. So Dave?
I'm going to 4. I might be overrating it a tad, but it's so much fun that I'm going to stick with it.
Are you trying to overcompensate because of my rating, Dave?
No. Not at all. It still got the score. I mean, I could give it 4 for the score alone.
Yeah, the score is fantastic. We've mentioned just briefly, but Carpenter, obviously a great composer in addition to a filmmaker.
Yeah.
Cool.
So we'll come back then in a moment and talk about the legacy of The Fog. Welcome back to Awesome Movie Year. In this season finale of our season on the films of 1980, we are talking about the Audience Choice winner, The Fog. And thank you again to everyone who voted. There was obviously a good amount of enthusiasm for The Fog, so hopefully people have been somewhat interested.
Oh, they're going to be upset with me, Josh.
I mean, I feel like you've made a lot of reasonable criticisms. You're not just trashing this film. I think a lot of what you've said is fair.
Do you want to know a scene that I thought was really great?
Sure.
Was when the boy finds that wood that says Dane, which is the ship name Elizabeth Dane.
Right.
And Stevie Wayne just decides to carry it around everywhere like it's show and tell. But then she goes to the radio station and it turns, right? And it says 6 must die, right? And then the voice on the recordings that she's listened to, which is just promos for Smooth Jabs, becomes like the ghost pirate saying, "We must kill them all." And like I thought that was a very effective, scary scene.
Yeah, that's a really cool scene. And suddenly there's seawater coming from it that drenches her tapes, and then it catches on fire. And yeah, it's a cool spooky scene.
Yeah, I wanted more like that.
Yeah, and then she just kind of leaves the driftwood there. I guess it doesn't really come up again.
Well, she put it out with a fire extinguisher.
Right. What else is there to do with it?
But that's what I mean. Like you're saying, like they bring stuff up and then it's like, oh, I guess we're done with that. We don't.
Yeah, I suppose that's true. So we're talking about the legacy of The Fog. And I mean, we mentioned a bit Carpenter's subsequent career. I mean, in the 80s, it was just amazing. And even though a lot of those films weren't huge commercial hits, they've all become really acknowledged genre classics, from The Fog to Escape from New York, The Thing, They Live, Starman, Christine, Big Trouble in Little China. I mean, it's an amazing run. And all kind of genre movies, but in a lot of different approaches, not just horror movies, but action and science fiction and a lot of different kind of stuff. So he definitely fell off in the 90s. Like I said, I remember seeing stuff like Vampires in the theater, which was not good. Although I did enjoy at the time, like
Ghosts from Mars.
Madness. I've never seen Ghosts from Mars.
Well, a lot of people like In the Mouth of Madness, so I think that one is well regarded too.
Yeah, that was one of the only later ones that got some decent response. And then he just kind of moved away from it. He maybe wasn't getting the budgets that he wanted. He wasn't getting the success he wanted. The last movie he made was in 2010 called The Ward, which was very poorly reviewed and I never saw. But he's really, like, in the last several years, kind of come into this, not second career, because he was always a composer and he does the music for most of his own films, but as a composer sort of separately from being a filmmaker has had this big resurgence, going on tour, releasing albums, all this stuff.
Dave, have you seen him live?
I sure have. Yeah.
Oh, nice. How was that?
It was awesome. Yeah. At the Hard Rock. He played like stuff from The Fog, everything from all these classic scores. It was great.
So when he's doing that, is there like a background screen to match the scenes? Yeah.
Yep.
Cool.
Yep. They're showing the scenes, and it's him and his son plays with them. And yeah, I mean, these scores just sound so cool. And
yeah, that sounds awesome.
Yeah,
it sounds great.
It's great, especially because they're so like minimalist a lot of the times. And he's just standing there, boom, just hitting that one key and just, letting it ride out,
Josh, I was thinking the other thing about Carpenter, obviously we know the Halloween resurgence, but literally like all of his movies seem to be either remade or ready to be remade. He's just booming as far as like an intellectual property guy.
Right. They did, as we said, remake The Fog in 2005, which is very, very bad. With it's a very quintessential like early 2000s remake with Tom Welling and Maggie Grace. Just like two people who happened to be on popular TV shows at the time. And, but there was also, there's all these Halloween sequels that David Gordon Green has made that Carpenter is involved with recently, that he's composed music for. There was a sort of remake / prequel to The Thing, which I think is actually kind of an underrated movie with Mary Elizabeth Winstead. I feel like there's probably going to be a new Christine movie just because that's a Stephen King property and everything Stephen King is being redone. But you're right. All of his other stuff you could absolutely see.
They already redid Assault on Precinct 13 as well.
Yes,
right?
Yes, they did.
I think They Live is ripe for a remake any day now, it seems like.
Yeah, and I think there's been talks about a sequel or remake of Big Trouble in Little China. I mean, there's tons of possibilities there. But Carpenter seems like even as he's gotten involved with movies again, like composing music for those Halloween movies, or he composed the score for the new crappy version of Firestarter. He doesn't seem to have much interest in directing a movie anymore.
Maybe, he's directed plenty of movies, right?
Sure.
And like you said, he's on tour. Dave is saying he's touring with his kid. He's like a rock star now. He can just chill. He can do that. He can do like horror conventions and just like enjoy the sunset, right?
Right. And he's put out, not only has he composed scores for new movies, but he's put out albums just of instrumental music that are not tied to any film. So he definitely seems like he's doing exactly what he wants to do, which, he should be able to at this point, right?
Yeah. Which supposedly includes being a big gamer.
Good for him, Yeah. Enjoy those video games. Why not?
Yeah.
Adrienne Barbeau, as we said, she was married to John Carpenter at this time, but that didn't last very long. But she's had a long career, mostly in kind of B movies. She's definitely known as a horror movie, genre movie kind of actor. She's done a lot of TV. and a lot of voice acting. I think most notably as Catwoman on the Batman animated series.
She played Maud's daughter in Maud.
There you go. That was, I think, earlier before this, but before she had leaped to TV, but is still working.
Swamp Thing's probably the biggest thing that she's known for, I'd say.
Yeah, in the 80s, she did that. She was Swamp Thing's love interest, I think.
Spicy.
And I always remember a great kind of cult movie that she was in called Cannibal Women in the Avocado Jungle of Death.
Yeah. Wasn't Bill Maher in that movie?
Bill Maher and Shannon Tweed. It's like this ridiculous B movie that's actually quite clever and funny. And I'm always recommending it to people. So that movie, formative experience for me.
She wrote, well, I don't want to know any more about that. She wrote 4 books. And after John Carpenter, she married Billy Van Zandt, brother of E Street Band guitarist Stephen Van Zandt.
Man, we got a Springsteen reference in here somehow. That is amazing.
No, hey man, that's who she married. I didn't make him get married, Josh. This isn't totally arranged marriage.
Right. No, totally. Jamie Lee Curtis, I mean, she's a huge star. We could run.
Still doing great, great, right? She's got 2 Golden Globes and a BAFTA. We loved her in Everything, Everywhere, All at Once this year. Coming up, Halloween Ends. She's in the Borderlands movie. And the one I wanted to mention was, remember that sitcom she was on with Richard Lewis, Anything But Love? I bet that would be worth rewatching at this point in time.
I know. Did you watch it when it was originally on?
Yeah, but I was like 10 or something. I didn't think I got it, but that was a 4-season sitcom. I bet it was a pretty smart show and everything.
Yeah, maybe. I never saw it, but yeah, she's done everything from TV to films. I mean, she started out between this and Halloween, and then Prom Night and Halloween 2. She was really like this kind of scream queen early in her career, but she's, expanded in so many ways. And she seems to genuinely love that Halloween franchise and love doing those Halloween movies, even though the last one was not very good.
And married to Christopher Guest, who we've talked about here a lot.
Yeah.
But, one thing I like about Jamie Lee Curtis is she has no, kind of false expectations or fronts about looking younger than she is, or like trying to Hollywood herself up. She is very comfortable with how she's aging, and she's playing that really well in these movies. And I really appreciate that.
Yeah. And she's a big enough star and she has enough clout that she can still get cast in things, whereas a lot of actors probably less famous than her have trouble with that. But she's using that clout for a good purpose.
Yeah. And have they announced, is it True Lies? Is that being remade or turned into a television show or something? I'm sure we'll see her there.
Yeah, it is. I don't think she's involved, although maybe she'll do a cameo or something. But it has gotten picked up as a TV show. That's a fun movie.
Yeah, that's a great movie. I like it.
Yeah. Janet Leigh, who of course is Jamie Lee Curtis's mother. I mean, before this, she was a screen legend. I mean, Psycho, Touch of Evil, Manchurian Candidate, Little Women. I mean, going back to the 1940s.
Yeah.
Her career after this was mostly just kind of smaller TV roles. She did appear once again with Jamie Lee Curtis in Halloween H2O, which was the previous attempt at sort of rebooting the Halloween franchise by bringing Jamie Lee Curtis back that didn't really have the level of success of the more recent ones.
Was that Rob Zombie?
No. The Rob Zombie one was a remake, but that Halloween H2O was like the most recent ones where Jamie Lee Curtis returns as the older version of her character. And so Janet Leigh had a sort of a small appearance in that film. So kind of a nice little mother-daughter thing in there.
Also wrote 4 books.
Man, I'm sure she's got some really great Hollywood stories in those books.
Yeah. Golden Globe for Psycho, one of the most iconic film roles of all time.
Yeah, absolutely. And she passed away in 2004. Tom Atkins was definitely a John Carpenter favorite, appeared in Escape from New York. He's the star of Halloween 3, which, have you seen Halloween 3, Dave?
No, I know it's like its own thing, right? It's like a totally different story.
Yeah, and Tom Atkins, you think Tom Atkins gets laid in this movie. Man, does Tom Atkins get laid in Halloween 3? Sometimes it seems like that's the plot of Halloween 3. But which was also, of course, directed by Tommy Wallace, who is another John Carpenter associate. And Tom Atkins still works in kind of small scale films and TV work and whatever, is still a busy guy.
Then I was going to move on to Hal Holbrook, who I love, and who how could you not love Hal Holbrook? American Treasure. His play Mark Twain Tonight won him a Tony Award, and he performed it live for almost 6 decades, I think. That's incredible,
Amazing.
you know?
Yeah.
5 Emmys, an Oscar nod for Into the Wild, which he's so good in. I remember just like he's the highlight of that movie. And then, of course, just classics, All the President's Men, Wall Street. And then, he's just The Firm, Men of Honor. I'm not calling them classics, but he's a big time, one of the great actors out there.
Yeah, and he kept working almost all the way until the end of his life. He died last year at age 95, and a lot of times in these supporting roles. But he had a movie in 2009 called That Evening Sun that I remember reviewing. That was a rare like lead role for him. That was really good. Where it definitely took advantage of his kind of elder statesman status, playing this older character, reflecting on his life, and I remember, I don't remember a lot of details about it, but I think I had it on my like top 10 list that year. And it was a really like nice small scale drama.
I'll have to check it out. Of course, another classic actor, John Houseman, who I don't know if I sound like. I have not really studied his voice, but I do remember Alec Berg is a good John Houseman name from Seinfeld. And if you research John Houseman, it is fascinating because of his collaboration and his subsequent headbutting with Orson Welles, all the stuff he did to kind of build modern theater in America in the 1930s and 40s. And just he is as big of an actor as he is. He's probably an even bigger producer. He was like, head of development in movie studios, and he won an Oscar for The Paper Chase. Just Rollerball, 3 Days of the Condor, and of course Ricky Schroeder's grandfather on Silver Spoons. But what an interesting man that guy was.
Yeah, and he comes in and he's just in this movie for a short time, but he adds that presence and that gravitas that like only someone like that can really add to introduce this film.
Yes, I got to hear him speak. I don't.
Yeah, no, that was. And the only other person I wanted to mention is Deborah Hill, who is the co-writer on this with John Carpenter and producer. And she worked with John Carpenter on a lot of his films, including these early ones. And she was really instrumental in his career taking off, and worked as a producer on other films as well. And she died in 2005. But I mean, Carpenter, I think, would say that, he wouldn't have had a career if it weren't for Deborah Hill. So an important sort of unsung person on this film.
One thing I was reading is in the 90s, John Carpenter was pitching an anthology, which I think could be done today, about the fog, but it wasn't about the fog. It was how the fog was leading into other supernatural stories that tied together. And I really think that could be interesting.
Yeah, that could be something. And you're right. I think that could be something that's absolutely done today. John Carpenter presents the fog and gets some, younger, newer horror filmmakers to work on little standalone stories, and I could totally see that being on Netflix or something.
And then also, if it leads into other supernatural stories, it could be like John Carpenter presents The Fog presents Tornado.
John Carpenter's Sharknado.
All right.
Anything else you want to add on the legacy of this film, Jason?
No, always down to watch these, whether they're for me or not. It's always good to check them out. So happy to do it. And thank you for all the votes.
Yes. Thanks again to everyone who voted. We always appreciate your participation, and hope you appreciate this episode. So that is The Fog. And that is this episode of Awesome Movie Year. You can check us out on social media where you voted.
Yes, you did vote on social media. Likely not on our website, awesomemovieyear.com, which is totally adequate. You can find us on any of the social medias at Awesome Movie Year or Awesome Movie Pod on Twitter. I'm Jason Harris Comedy, or Jay Harris Comedy, on all those socials. And of course, my website, Go for Jason, is wrecked on the beach somewhere.
Yeah. My website, joshbellhateseverything.com, goes back so far that you can read a little blurb that I wrote in 2005 about The Fog. It's not very interesting, but it's there. You can find me at Josh Bell Hates Everything on Facebook and at Signal Bleed on Twitter, and listen to our producer David Rosen's awesome podcast, Piecing It Together.
Check out Piecing It Together wherever you listen to podcasts, and follow us on social media at Piecing Pod. And since my music is so heavily influenced by John Carpenter, I'll give it a little plug. Check out bydavidrosen.com.
Yeah, do that. And Dave, of course, is also a film composer who may someday get to work on a film as great as The Fog. we can do.
Yeah. So what he's saying is all the ones you've already worked on are garbage.
Are not like horror classics.
Jason directed one of the films I worked on.
Josh co-wrote that movie.
Yeah, and it's not as good as The Fog. I am confident in saying it's not as good as The Fog.
I'm gonna fight you on that one.
All right. Well, also the Popcorn and Puzzle Pieces Facebook group, which was another place where people voted for this. So check that out if you want to vote in our future audience choice polls and participate in some cool movie discussions with all of us and other movie fans. And what is in our next episode, Jason?
Josh, we're going to do the epilogue, talk about films that we considered, didn't get to, or perhaps missed in 1980. And in that epilogue, as per the norm, we will reveal what year we are going to cover in our next season, season 12 of Awesome Movie Year.
So tune in next time for that 1980 epilogue. And thanks for listening to Awesome Movie Year.
Thank you for listening to Awesome Movie Year. Make sure to follow Awesome Movie Year on Facebook, at Awesome Movie Pod on Twitter, and at Awesome Movie Year on Instagram. And if you like the show, review us and rate us with 5 stars on Apple Podcasts.
An All Points West production, produced by David Rosen in Las Vegas.